December 5th, 2014. A Korean air flight on its way from New York City to South Korea returns to the gate. Screams and yelling can be heard coming from first class. What is going on? Gapjil. After taking her first class seat on the plane, Heather Cho, the daughter of the chairman of Korean Air, was served a bag of macadamia nuts. This enraged her. Why, she screamed, were these not plated for her? She screamed and confronted the cabin crew and then forced the chief flight attendant to kneel and apologize to her in front of everyone. Dissatisfied still, Heather decided the only rational thing to do was turn the entire plane around and leave the flight attendant behind in New York City. One bag of nuts, enough to delay an international flight and abandon a hard-working employee in a foreign country. But this isn't limited to Heather. Her sister, Emily Cho, threw a drink at an advertising executive during a business meeting in 2018. In 2017, Kim Dong-seon, the heir to the Hanwha Group and horse dandy, swung a whiskey bottle at bar staff several times and hit the bar manager in the head, grabbing him by the back of the neck. Shin Dong-hak was caught drunk driving, Hanbo Steel's loan scandal, Kim Byung-jun attacking passengers in 2016. The list goes on and on and on. Korea, a democracy in name, is run by a small group of elite families called Chaebols. These Chaebols include the likes of Samsung, LG, Hyundai, SK, and Lotte. These five alone account for nearly 50% of Korea's GDP, placing it in a precarious situation where abuse is accepted and influence is unavoidable. How did this happen? And what does this mean for Korea? This is Chaebols, the puppet masters of the morning calm. Following the Korean War, South Korea was in a state of utter devastation. Its nascent industrial foundations were destroyed and the economy was paralyzed. To rebuild the country, the Lee Syngman administration adopted a policy of import substitution, which focused on building Korean industry to meet Korean demand. These protectionist policies, aided by foreign aid mainly from the United States, enabled entrepreneurs to set up shop and go competing without foreign interference. This included Samsung, whose founder got his start refining sugar and manufacturing wool textiles. And although the Chaebols were growing, it was slower and more competitive. It wasn't until the military coup led by General Park Chung-hee that the Chaebols saw their fortunes grow exponentially. Park had ambitious economic goals, and he was dissatisfied with the natural forces of economic growth laid out by traditional capitalism. He wanted to channel investment into industry and grow rapidly. The only way he saw this was possible was to partner with a handful of conglomerates to execute against his goals. His government would develop 5-year economic development plans and push capital into Chaebols to execute against them. To make things even sweeter, he nationalized commercial banks, enabling the government to channel scarce domestic and foreign capital to favor Chaebols. Moreover, the government often guaranteed the repayment of foreign loans to Chaebols, increasing capital access. This would be like the US pushing all funds to Tesla, Exxon, and Microsoft and disregarding any other businesses. Do we need to build more refining capacity? Send the money to Exxon. Do we need more cars? Send the money to Tesla. Do we want to lead in AI? Send the money to Microsoft. Furthermore, Korea provided these companies with subsidies, exclusive import licenses, tax breaks, and protection against foreign competitors. This was business on easy mode, and although it skirted traditional market mechanisms for capital allocation, it seemed to work. Exports in Korea grew from 55 million in 1962 to 835 million by 1970, a 16-fold increase in less than 10 years. GDP per capita increased from $106 to $279 during that same period, and then rapidly rose to $13,000 by 1996. This sounds great, but the economy became highly concentrated as Chaebols became too big to fail, and the founders began exhibiting behavior counter to efficient markets. They focused on political connections over operating efficiency. They diversified into disparate industries with little to no thought, and they started taking on crazy amounts of debt due to government and banking support. This all came to a head in 1997. The Asian financial crisis swept through Korea and the Chaebol system began showing weaknesses. The top 30 Chaebols had an average debt to equity of nearly 600%. To put this in perspective, The S&P 500 today has an average ratio of around 60%. Because of this, 11 of the 30 largest chaebols collapsed between July 1997 and June 1999, including the largest corporate bankruptcy in history at the time, the Daewoo Group, with nearly $80 billion in unpaid debt, unheard of at the time. The head of Daewoo, Kim Woo-chong, fled Korea and left taxpayers holding the bag. He would later return to Korea and have his crimes pardoned. The international community and IMF came swooping in, putting together a massive rescue package, but they had a few conditions. For example, they wanted increased managerial accountability, financial transparency, and governance, because according to them, one of the main reasons the Korean system failed was the opacity of the chaebol system. They wanted to make sure that the chaebols did not operate with their power unchecked. Fast forward to today, and it almost sounds like a joke. Since the rescue package, there have been tons of scandals related to chaebol corruption and lack of transparency. Samsung on 3 separate occasions for tax evasion and bribery, SK Group twice for embezzlement and corruption, Hyundai countless times for slush funds and bribery, Hanwha for embezzlement, Lotte for corruption and bribery, and many, many, many more. In almost every case, charges are later dropped. It's so common for rich elites to get away with anything in Korea that there's actually a saying for it, the 3-5 rule. 3-year prison sentence that is suspended for 5 years. At the heart of the problem is the fact that chaebol ownership structures are extremely opaque and non-control investor influence is non-existent. This allows chaebols to do whatever they want within their sprawling industrial empires. It's so problematic that it has led to the Korea discount. This basically means that Korean stocks trade well below Japanese and Taiwanese peers on the same metrics. For example, if Samsung traded like its rivals, its value would double. But there is a very sound reason for this. Chaebols control everything and don't care about other shareholders. For instance, the chaebol Korea Zinc has been battling an activist shareholder recently. To maintain control, the chairman planned to sell $1.8 billion in share, which would damage shareholders but allow him to maintain control, harming others for personal benefit, the chaebol way. Similarly, other chaebols are known to conduct nefarious related party transactions. These are deals made between different companies that the families own. For example, if they own a poorly performing company, Company A, they might force a well-performing company, Company B, to purchase Company A for a high price. This happens all the time, enriching the family at the expense of other shareholders. And this is one of the main reasons why the Korean stock market is perpetually trading at a discount. Foreign investors do not trust the chaebols. Furthermore, Koreans are starting to not trust the chaebols and have increasingly invested abroad. This has been such a problem that the Korean government began to introduce initiatives like the Corporate Value Up program. This program encourages listed companies to improve shareholder value and corporate governance. This sounds great in practice, but it's 100% voluntary. Another reason for the discount is that chaebols benefit from it. In the case of listed company owners, inheritance tax is effectively 60%, and low valuations and opaque structures enable them to skirt tax liabilities. These chaebols operate with pure impunity, but the problem isn't simply corruption, it's sheer economic dominance. To show how lopsided Korea is, we will compare it with the United States. As of 2024, Korea's top 30 companies' revenues accounted for 77% of total GDP. Compare this to the United States, where the top 500 companies account for 66% of GDP. That is 2.6% per company versus 0.1% per company, a 26-fold difference. But it gets worse. Approximately 58% of Americans work for companies with over 300 employees. In Korea, this number is 14%. This means that a small number of companies control the market and only a small number of the population benefits from it. An inverted pyramid of privilege. This has extreme consequences. Firstly, given such a small number of large Korean enterprises control the entire market, small-medium enterprises have few alternatives for companies to sell into. This creates significant negotiating leverage on the part of the chaebols. For example, after Hyundai acquired a majority stake in Kia, they controlled between 70 to 80% of the domestic car market. As such, they began instituting aggressive contracting policies. For one, they forced suppliers to exclusively supply Hyundai Kia, no one else. They introduced clauses that allowed them to see into supplier cost structures, allowing them to squeeze margins. And worst of all, they leveraged their power to understand supplier technologies so that they could appropriate them and cut out suppliers. And since Chaebols control the market, small and medium-sized enterprises do not litigate these practices in fear of retaliation. But this isn't limited to Hyundai. Samsung demands detailed technical disclosures as a precondition for contracts. This allows them to copy ideas and eventually cut out SMEs. Lotte faced criticism for forcing small suppliers to participate in promotional events at their own expense. And this isn't necessarily illegal, it's just the benefit of consolidation. For those who don't know, consolidation is the dream of businesses. Peter Thiel, successful investor and entrepreneur, discusses this all the time. If you can't have a monopoly, what's the point? Once you have one, you call all the shots. Furthermore, this extends into labor practices. As mentioned, large Korean enterprises employ a small fraction of the Korean economy. However, they pay nearly 60% more than small and medium-sized enterprises. This means that these SMEs have a hard time attracting talent. To make matters worse, the Chaebols are hiring less than before, and although they've been growing, it's been jobless growth. Korea saw a decline in new jobs for the 11th straight quarter. This has been particularly tough on young people, with Korea having the highest unemployment rate for those in their 20s in the entire OECD, with nearly 20% unemployed. Korean labor laws have extremely high protection for those who work in Chaebols, meaning that those who have been employed for a long time are highly unlikely to leave or be fired. Now, this might sound like a good thing, but it means that as Chaebols continue to slow down hiring, it disproportionately impacts young people. And this doesn't even begin to mention the impact that Chaebols have on working hours, which we talk about in our award-winning video on Korea's demographic collapse. When a few companies control your economic future, you have no choice but to work. And the saddest part is, this is almost unfixable. When large systems become entrenched, they become too big to fail and too fragile to fix. And the Korean Chaebol system is as entrenched as they come. If politicians campaign on reform, the Chaebols will use their power to crush them and make them unemployable outside of politics. If law firms want to take cases against Chaebols, then they will never be able to serve the Chaebol again, who generate the bulk of revenue in the country. If universities and professors want to publish papers criticizing the Chaebols, they will receive less funding from the biggest donors. If the news wants to criticize the Chaebols, they will lose market access and investors. And if someone tries to break up the Chaebols, workers will be upset, worried that Korea might go into a downward spiral. No matter how you cut it, Korea's Chaebol situation is almost unfixable. Layer on the fact that Korean culture is one of collectivism, it is hard to imagine a movement arising against their foundational economic engines. Korea is what happens when monopolies take hold, when family wealth and power goes unchecked. And although we believe in capitalism, we want to highlight how working class people have been taken advantage of for decades in Korea. Koreans are hardworking and kind people, but their country is being run by unanointed kings and queens. The Chaebols control the factories, the roads, the ports, the banks, the law firms, and the government. The heirs were born with a gold spoon in mouth and nicely plated macadamia nuts. They did not build Korea, but they will destroy it. And like they say, what is a mob to a king to a god, and a god to a Chaebol? Thank you for watching. If you like this video, hit subscribe, check out our other videos, our newsletter, and our Discord, where we discuss topics like this for fun all the time.